I've seen a lot of werewolf films throughout the years. I even have the original Wolfman, the one with Lon Chaney Jr., which is a pretty decent flick, and of course I have all of the sequels in the Universal Monster series with Lon Chaney Jr. teaming up with the other Universal monsters, usually Dracula and Frankenstein, usually just those big three in the crossovers. There was House of Frankenstein, there was House of Dracula, there's Dracula meets Frankenstein, or whatever. There are a lot of those, and Lon Chaney Jr. was the only one who reprised his role for all of the films that his character showed up in, and he ended up being my favorite character in that little franchise of Universal Monster Horrors, even though the monster from Frankenstein and the Bride of Frankenstein was the heart of the entire Universal Monster series, and probably are the two best films in the entire Universal Monsters lineup. I liked the Wolfman's character, and I love that they gave him a little saga to go into, and they even gave him his cure in the final film, and he was no longer cursed, and that was a beautiful thing, and I loved that about that movie. And of course, I watched the other Wolfman with Benicio del Toro. Of course, I have seen the Little Muskrat kids. Alvin and the Chipmunks. Yeah, I've seen Alvin and the Chipmunks with the Wolfman. Alvin, Simon, Theodore. Theodore becomes a werewolf chipmunk thing. It was a very funny cartoon. I saw it 25 years ago, of course. Okay, I don't remember everything about that movie, but I'm eventually going to pick that one up and bring it back into the collection, because that is a memory that I need to revive. Of course, I have Cursed, which is the Kevin Williamson era, 90s era werewolf film. That was a very good one. And then everybody kept on praising An American Werewolf in London. I had never seen it for years and years and years. I finally saw it recently. I may talk about it, I may not, but it's okay. I loved the werewolf transformation sequences in these films, especially the original Wolfman and the American Werewolf in London. Both have great practical effects for werewolf transformations. But for some reason, so many of these werewolf films just don't do well. The Benicio del Toro one did not do well. So we just don't get too many werewolf films. And then we have yet another that almost went by off my radar. Slipped me completely. Probably due to this cover here. When you look at this cover, what does it say to you? Well, it might say to me, this is a dollar bin video, right? You may pick this up for like $1 or half $1 and expect something garbage. Let's look at the side here. We see LD. I don't recognize that label. We look at the back here. There are some decent little screenshots here, but again, I don't recognize any of the production labels, so this could very well be an indie production with very little money put into it, and I can understand a lot of people thinking this about this movie and not giving it a chance based off the cover. Well, apparently this wasn't the cover that it always had. Is when we open the case here, we see this DVD. This had this cover before. There's these big fangs over there. That used to be the original case cover, and that looked pretty interesting. But even then, I still had no idea what this was. So I finally decided to give it a look, just off of a whim. And this is a werewolf movie, and it's an interesting take on the werewolf movie. Now, we know all of the trieds and tropes of Dracula and vampires over the years, and how they've changed the rules quite a bit in each decade's era of vampire movies. We changed the rules for Edward. He glows in the sunlight, but otherwise he's completely different from Dracula. And then, of course, we've seen other versions of Dracula, which are very different and have very different rules and things that you have to follow. So this is one of those types of movies where they redefine what it is to be a werewolf into something that is truly very much a gothic horror movie. If the Universal monster movies, and more particularly the Hammer horror movies, there's only ever one werewolf Hammer horror movie. I do have it, and I completely forgot about it. I should probably rewatch it at some point, because it's probably the only Hammer horror movie I don't remember that I have. But if you're a fan of Hammer Horror's aesthetic, like if you watched The Gorgon, that's probably one of the best ones that I can give as an example of what this type of aesthetic is trying to show you. If you're a fan of this gothic horror and you watch this, you're gonna see what I mean. You're probably not gonna see all the bright red blood like Hammer horror tends to do and makes it really contrast the background. But it's the aesthetic. They drain the color a little bit, probably because they're so old movies. But the color is a little bit drained. There's not a lot of saturation. The tone. It's a period piece set in the late 1800s. I loved almost everything about the movie, the way it was shot, the way it looked, the way the actors acted. There's not a lot of big people in here. The biggest name is somebody whose name I've already forgotten, but I remember seeing him in a couple other things, but he was never a big name, and everybody else in here were never big names. This was definitely a low production flick, but it was really well made. It looks really good for a horror movie, for something that you would expect to be just some crappy low budget thing. It ends up blowing your mind and showing you that this is a modern day Hammer horror, gothic horror aesthetic film, and I need more of it. I'm not gonna tell you what this werewolf looks like. I want you to watch The Cursed. I want you to see The Cursed. I want you to find out what this creature is and what it looks like for yourself, because it is a treat.